Hello, I'm Darth Vangoff, and this is Star Wars Saga Edition, a disorganized role-playing game. In this video, I will continue discussion of something that I mentioned in my previous video, Star Wars Saga Edition, Why I Love the System and Hate the Edition. In that video, I explained how it was difficult to play the edition because the books failed to be a go-to source for playing the game. A role-playing game needs rules for playing the game, and that's all represented in the first book, the core rulebook. But in addition to rules, the game also needs content. In my last video, I referred to this as stuff to draw from. If you haven't seen my last video, what I'm referring to is the options that the game provides to the players and GMs to use. For a GM, this would be enemies, beasts, and hazards to place in an encounter to challenge the players. For the players, this would be feats, talents, and other options to make the character come to life as a Star Wars character. Being able to find and reference this content is a nightmare for Saga Edition. The main reason for this is because of how messy the books are. The books fail because of not just how messy they are individually, but also how messy the edition is holistically when you put all the books together. A single book doesn't necessarily have the content that is related to the subject matter of that book. And holistically, this edition is messy because it's not intuitive which book you need to go to in order to reference something. The books for Saga Edition, rather than contributing usable information that the players and game masters can use as a resource, instead provided another place of information to get lost in, and another place you had to delve through to find information. There are two main reasons for this. Stuff is all over the place, and stuff is in the wrong place. These two problems are the root for everything that I have to say in this video, so I will explain this claim with examples later on. Each of these points lead to a larger problem. The people who created the edition, that is, the staff at Wizards of the Coast, the company that made this game, did not have a mastery of their edition. And it shows by the fact that there are a lot of omissions, duplications, redundancies, and content that just made other content obsolete. Star Wars Saga Edition was less than the sum of the 14 books, and these books had no synergy with each other. All the books expanded upon the foundation laid out by only the core rulebook, and just in rare instances did they supplement content that any of the other books introduced. It seems as if Wizards of the Coast assumed you would not buy all 14 books. And it seems as if they made the books as independent from each other so you could buy as few of them as possible. Maybe this was on purpose. After giving this particular failure of Star Wars Saga Edition more thought than possibly any of the other 7 billion or so individuals alive on planet Earth, yes, I may have given this that much thought. I think there was an underlying philosophy driving the design of the books that I will refer to as the 3-book idea. Basically, this 3-book idea is that a player or game master would need only 3 books to play the game. A core rulebook, a book for the particular era you were playing in, and a book that had a dual purpose of being tied to a theme, a style of play, as well as being tied to a class. You could play with more books if you wanted to, but the minimum seemed to be 3, and that minimum seemed to be a bar that was set so you could play at that minimum. Since you can combo these era books with any of the class theme books, that is, you can play as any class in any era, these books were primarily tied to the core rulebook, and therefore they had only one book to stand upon, which increased the need for their self-sufficiency. But content was still spread out through so many books that this ended up only in failure. Anytime a book seemed to be a comprehensive go-to resource, such as the Knights of the Old Republic campaign setting and the Legacy era campaign settings, they still managed to contribute to the overall problem of stuff being all over the place and stuff being in the wrong place. Only 2 books did a partial job of addressing this issue. Yet these books, Starships of the Galaxy and Scavenger's Guide to Droids, Even though they had to define subject matter that would have allowed them to be that go-to comprehensive resource, they still failed because there were so many droids and starships found outside of those books and other books. All 14 books, on their own, failed to support the design philosophy of the three-book idea. And the three-book idea is the only concept that I could think of as a logical driving force for the way the books were released. So if I'm going to be criticizing these books so heavily, that leads to the question of what are the books and what's in them? I will divide the edition into 4 categories. The first category is just one book, the core rulebook. It is the book that the other books are built off of. It has the rules for how to play the game. It has a little bit of everything as well. So for the players, it has the 5 core classes, a few prestige classes, a few species to play as, and a selection of feats and force abilities for the characters to use. It also has rules on how to use the skills, and how to select the skills. It also has some tools for the Game Master, such as hazards, as well as iconic characters from the eras, such as Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, in case the Game Master wants the players to encounter those characters. The core rulebook also has some of the beasts from the movies, such as the Dewback and the Tauntaun. There are also some items, such as starships, weapons, armor, tools, and other handyman items, and droids, for both the Game Master and the players to use. And there's also just a little bit of information on the galaxy. There's a little Galactic Gazetteer section that details a few of the planets. But it's not that big, and it doesn't go that much into depth on very many planets. As you can see, it's a little bit of everything in addition to the rules. It's a sample of what the game has to offer, but it's not enough to actually recreate the Star Wars galaxy in your game. In fact, I think there's only stats for one transport ship. On page 182 of the core rulebook, the Corellian YT-1300 transport ship, I think that's the only transport ship in this book that's statted. So as you can see, it just has enough for you to understand how the game's played, but it doesn't suffice in that element I mentioned in my previous video, stuff to draw from, stuff to actually put in your game. There's not a whole lot of that in here. If you have only the core rulebook, and you don't have any of the other books, you definitely feel like you're missing something. The next set of books I will go into are the 5 era books. They are the Knights of the Old Republic Campaign Guide, the Clone Wars Campaign Guide, the Force Unleashed Campaign Guide, the Rebellion Era Campaign Guide, and the Legacy Era Campaign Guide. In case you didn't notice, they all have the words Campaign Guide after them, because these are the equivalent of campaign settings that you would find in other role-playing games. Since the Star Wars setting takes place in one galaxy, you have to divide the campaign settings along eras along the timeline, rather than geographical regions. And just to be clear, the Force Unleashed Campaign Guide, this really should be called the Dark Times Campaign Guide, because that's the era it takes place in. But I guess for marketing purposes, they didn't call it the Dark Times, they called it the Force Unleashed, because it came out around the same time the Force Unleashed video game came out. These books contain new stuff for players and character creation, including new species, new talents for existing classes and prestige classes, new prestige classes, new feats, and some of these books contain new uses for skills. There's also some items in here, such as new droids, new equipment, weapons, armor, tools, new vehicles, new force abilities, and it also has a few things that aren't pertinent to character creation, and not even necessarily for the players, such as information about the eras, which the players may or may not already know in case they've read the comic books, played the video games, whatever. New NPCs that the PCs are likely to encounter in those eras, These include specific NPCs that you may have seen in media, such as, Kit Fisto you might encounter during the Clone Wars. It has assorted threats for the Game Master to throw in an encounter, from creatures, weapons emplacements, etc. Each book has a gazetteer section for planets that are prominent in that campaign setting. Now, in case you didn't notice, these are things that are found in the core rulebook, feats, talents, classes, so on and so forth. It expands upon what the core rulebook already gives you. The third category of books is what I refer to as the 5 thematic books, also known as the 5 class books, because the themes tend to revolve around a particular class. These books are Scum and Villainy, Galaxy at War, the Jedi Academy Training Manual, the Unknown Regions, and the Galaxy of Intrigue. As you can see, each of these books has a class it corresponds with. The Scum and Villainy book revolves around the Scoundrel class. The theme of the book is underworld dealings and dishonorable freelance work, which fits in with the Scoundrel class. Galaxy at War fits with the Soldier class. It's a book on, you guessed it, military warfare and mass combat. The Unknown Regions book supplements the Scout class, as it is a book revolving around exploring the galaxy, finding new planets, cataloging new beasts, and that's exactly what the Scout class is built for. The Galaxy of Intrigue book ties in with the Noble class because that class is the one with the best social skills. This book also introduced the Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition skill challenge mechanic to Star Wars, and in the Galaxy of Intrigue book, it gave nobles feats and abilities to deal with skill challenges, so that's the class that they were pushing with that book. The last book is the Jedi Academy Training Manual. That book ties in with the Jedi. It also supplements all Force users, but most of the stuff ties in with Jedi the best, as well as any Force tradition where the members would gain levels in the Jedi class. Each of these theme and class books has, you guessed it, new stuff for character creation, including new species, new talents for existing classes and prestige classes, new prestige classes, new feats. Some of the books contain new uses for skills. There's also other stuff outside of character creation, including new droids, new equipment for players to use, including weapons, armors, and tools, new vehicles. There's also some new Force abilities in some of the books, though they're scarce outside the Jedi Academy Training Manual. There's stuff that's not pertinent to character creation, including threats for the Game Master to throw at the players, encounters and adventures, tips for running games based off each theme. Does this sound familiar? I'm sure it does, because I just mentioned a list like this back in the Era books. So, which book is a go-to book for feats, prestige classes, species, Galaxy Gazetteer, skills, equipment, vehicles, droids? Which books are the go-to books for those things? There are go-to books. The fourth and final category of books are what I call reference books, also known as go-to books, also known as content books, also known as just stuff books. The reason why I like calling these stuff books is because it gives you stuff to draw from, as I mentioned in my last video. These 3 books are Starships of the Galaxy, Scavenger's Guide to Droids, and Threats of the Galaxy. Threats of the Galaxy is more of a Game Master book, although there's some random stuff in there that any player could use. The Starships book obviously has starships. It also has a few rules revolving around space travel and customizing starships. And the Droids book has droids, although it has rules for playing droids, etc. But if you notice, each of those other 5 era books and 5 class books, they also have droids, starships, and threats for the GM to throw at the players. So, those other books undermine the ability of that fourth category of books, the stuff to draw from books, from being a go-to source for droids, starships, and threats. And do you also notice that there is no go-to book for talents, feats, prestige classes, and other player abilities? There's no go-to book for species, and there's also no go-to book for a galaxy gazetteer. Information about the planets are just spewed throughout all the books. Now let's compare this to another role-playing game, Pathfinder. Pathfinder has a core rulebook, but it's not like Star Wars Saga Edition's rulebook. Saga Edition's rulebook has a little bit of everything. Pathfinder's core rulebook is called the Player's Handbook. It is more specifically for the players. There's less GM stuff in it, and more player stuff in it. It provides a more complete gaming experience for players. Game masters do need to read it just to learn the rules and to know what the players can do. Basically, the GM will also be using what the players use, but the Player's Handbook isn't just like a few monsters here and a few this here and a few that here. For instance, in Saga Edition's core rulebook, it dedicates 11 pages to the chapter that deals with the feats. In Pathfinder, the chapter that has the feats is 26 pages long. The other two main books for Pathfinder are the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's a go-to book for Dungeon Masters, and the Bestiary, which has all the monsters the Game Master can put into an encounter in one book. And the Bestiary might also be used by players who summon creatures. There's a fourth book that came out called the Advanced Player's Guide. It is a go-to source for players if they want more feats, and more class abilities, and more spells, etc. These four books provide a more playable role-playing game than the 14 books that make up Star Wars Saga Edition. And even though after the Advanced Player's Guide, Pathfinder released some other books, which aren't necessarily more comprehensive than Saga Edition's expanded books, still, Pathfinder is a more cohesive and referenceable role-playing game because of the way it organized its books. Pathfinder did compensate for the fact that some of these books that came out after the Advanced Player's Guide started to spread stuff too thin, that it created an Ultimate Equipment book so that there was a go-to book for players and game masters who wanted to reference equipment. Not to mention the fact that Pathfinder has a Bestiary 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, so that if you want a beast to throw at your players, you go to any of the bestiaries. Because Star Wars Saga Edition does not have a dedicated book for players, this causes a problem for players who want to play the game, and this leads me to my 3-book idea. Why would you not have a dedicated book for players unless you wanted to push this 3-book idea that I mentioned earlier in this video? The 3-book idea is that if you're a player, you would get the core rulebook, you would get a book on the era you're playing in, and you would get a book that either corresponded with your class or with the style of play that GM's going for. Or possibly both, which may mean 4 books. For instance, let's say you are going to play in the Clone Wars setting. Okay, the Clone Wars era, great. You would get the core rulebook, you would get the Clone Wars campaign guide, and say you were wanting to play a scoundrel, you would get the Scum and Villainy book. But if you were playing in a mass combat game, you may want to get the Galaxy at War book. Or you might want to get both books. This is the only idea that can justify why the books in Saga Edition are organized as they are. I believe that the 3-book idea doesn't cut it. You can't play the game with just the 3 books I mentioned. You can't play with just the core book, an era book, and either a book for the class or a book for the theme. And the reason for this is because stuff's all over the place, and stuff's in the wrong place. So what do I mean when I say stuff's all over the place? When I say stuff's all over the place, what I mean is feats and talents are not organized according to character build. So let's say I wanted to play a soldier during the Clone Wars, and I wanted to be an auto-fire specialist. Okay, so I would use the core rulebook, the Clone Wars era campaign guide, and the Galaxy at War book, and select talents and feats from there that would help me build an auto-fire specialist. Great. So your selection of feats from the Clone Wars book would be the Flood of Fire feat on page 29 and Spray Shot on page 31. And from the Galaxy at War book, you would probably want Rifle Master from page 25, although this is an optional feat. It doesn't really fit into autofire specifically, but it's just something you might want to take if you're using autofire with rifles. Even though the Rifle Master feat's optional, it's the only feat from the Galaxy at War book that I was able to find to supplement autofire. From the core rulebook, the only feat that dealt with autofire specifically that I could find was the Burst Fire feat on page 82. Although you might want to take the Weapon Focus feat for either rifles or heavy weapons, Weapon Focus being found on page 89, just because you're probably going to use rifles or heavy weapons with autofire. Here's the feats you wouldn't have access to if you were using only those books. You would be missing out on the autofire sweep feat from the Legacy era, page 34, and on that same page in the Legacy book there's autofire assault, which is not to be confused with the autofire assault soldier talent in the Galaxy at War book, which I'll mention later. And in the Force Unleashed book, there's Blaster Barrage on page 32 and Strafe on page 35. From the Unknown Regions book, there's the Targeted Area feat on page 28. So if you want to create an autofire specialist, all the feats are spread out and there's no one place to go to select your feats. But what about talents? Hopefully the autofire talents are all in one place, right? So going on that idea of we're using only the Galaxy at War book, Clone Wars book, and the core book, the core book does not have a whole lot in terms of talents for soldier, possibly weapon specialization, heavy weapons, or rifles, and the controlled burst talent for the Elite Trooper Prestige class. Otherwise, on Galaxy at War, if you want to look at the Galaxy at War book, there is the Autofire Assault Soldier talent. This is the actual talent here. That's on page 22. And the Ferocious Assault Elite Trooper talent on page 30. I have not been able to find an autofire specific talent in the Clone Wars book. So, what talents are found outside these three books that we would be missing if we were to restrict ourselves to the three-book idea? So in Legacy, there is an improved suppression fire soldier talent on page 31, not specifically autofire, but it has benefits when used with autofire, so you probably want to select it when you're creating an autofire specialist. There's another talent from the Rebellion book. It's called Hit the Deck on page 25. It's a Scoundrel talent. Scoundrel talent, that's right. And then if you want to look in the Unleashed book, there's the Extended Critical Range Rifles talent for the Elite Trooper, not specifically for autofire, but if you're using autofire, the chances are you're using rifles or heavy weapons, so that's something you might want to take. And that is on page 42 of Unleashed. So again, there are some talents that don't fall into the three books that we were looking at. What if you wanted to make a grappling character? That is, a character that wrestled a lot. Let's say you were using the core book, the Clone Wars era book, and the Galaxy at War book. And I know what you might be thinking. Hey, your idea is flawed. Trying to create a soldier that was involved in mass combat during the Clone Wars and trying to design him to grapple. You shouldn't be using the Galaxy at War book for such a character. Except that the Galaxy at War book also deals with martial arts. So all the feats related to martial arts should be in there. That is, all the feats related to hand-to-hand combat. And grappling should be included as that is a form of martial arts. So let's continue with this example. So you're using the core book, and you're looking for feats for grappling. In Chapter 5, there's the pin, crush, trip, and throw feats, which are basic. Like, I'm still surprised you have to get feats for these instead of just having these as automatic options, but whatever. Now, let's say you were using the Galaxy at War book to look for feats. There's the Stava training, I think it's Stava training feat from Galaxy at War page 27. And there's no other feats I could find. And in the Clone Wars book, there's no grappling feats I could find. So let's see what's missing from those 3 books. So let's say we were to look in the Legacy Era book. If we just took a look on page 36 in that book, we would see 3 feats that we could use. Multi-grab, knockheads, and grapple resistance. And I get it, grapple resistance is more resisting someone grappling you, but you'd still probably want to use it if you're grappling someone, so I included it here. If we were to also use the Scum and Villainy book, we would want the Close Combat Escape feat, which isn't exactly grappling, but still could be used in grappling situations. If we were to use the Intrigue book, we would want on page 25 the Bone Crusher feat, and in the Unknown Regions book on page 24, there's the Grab Back feat. Those are all feats that we would be missing if we were just to use those 3 books, the Clone Wars book, the Galaxy at War book, and the Core book. And you see how these feats are spread out through so many books. So what about talents? Certainly, the talents are all in one place, right? So in the Clone Wars book, there's no grappling talents at all. Sorry. In the Core book, there's the Expert Grappler Soldier talent on page 52. But that's about it. So that just leaves 1 book, the Galaxy at War book. So certainly there's talents there, right? I mean, there's a martial arts prestige class in that book, so there should be talents that relate to grappling and hand-to-hand combat in that book, right? So on page 33, there's the martial arts talent Stav Expertise, or Stava Expertise. This is the talent this time, not the feat. There's a feat and a talent. And that's it. So what we would be missing are 2 soldier talents on Legacy Era page 31, Grabber and Strong Grab, and the Galaxy of Intrigue book has 3 soldier talents on page 23, Crowd Control, Entangler, and Reverse Strength. Galaxy of Intrigue has more grappling talents than any other book. Look how many books you have to look through to get grappling talents and feats and autofire talents and feats. It's just too much. I could give more in-depth examples if I wanted to, but I really can't. There's just too much disorganization. I will give a brief example. If I wanted a character that had martial arts abilities, not grappling feats, but more actual hand-to-hand strikes and fighting, there's the martial arts 1, 2, and 3 feats from the core rulebook in Chapter 5. There's the Terras Kasi talent tree on page 53 of the Threats of the Galaxy book. There's a few soldier talents from Scum and Villainy, page 17 through 18. The Galaxy at War book has the Shock Boxer soldier talent tree on page 21, as well as a separate section on page 26 for martial arts feats, and then it has the martial arts prestige class on page 32 of that same Galaxy at War book. I don't want to get too much into depth about specific talents and feats for martial arts, but you get the idea. Those are also spread out through many books. And if I wanted to do an example on what you would need to create a sniping character, I would also be pulling feats and talents through various books, but I'm not even going to bother with sniping. Just, if you're going to create a sniping character, good luck with you. There are a few things to keep in mind with the examples I have given. Even though it looks like I've done a meticulous job picking examples of feats and talents that are all spewing all over the place, keep in mind that this list isn't comprehensive. That is, there might be auto-fire or grappling feats that could be found in any of the books that I missed. And that's the most frustrating thing about this edition, is if you look for something, you may miss it. My examples are actually so far limited, so it only includes feats and talents for certain builds. I'm not trying to look for specific equipment, armor, clothing, etc. So you might be looking for a piece of equipment. You may have to look through 14 books to find which one it is. And keep in mind, when you're trying to build an auto-fire character, you also want the equipment. So you want a weapon that can fire in auto-fire. You would also be looking through the books for auto-fire weapons as well as auto-fire feats and talents. And how's a new person supposed to know where to find these things? What in the edition directs a person to the place where there are auto-fire or grappling talents and feats? And note how some of these books seem like they should have nothing to do with grappling, such as the Legacy era or the Intrigue book. And also the same thing with auto-fire. Why is it that some auto-fire talents and feats are found in the Legacy era book? All eras have auto-fire weapons. What makes Legacy more auto-fire than the Clone Wars, an era of mass combat in which clone troopers were putting their guns on auto-fire and just mowing down battle droids? Why the Legacy era book and not the Clone Wars book? Where's the logic and reasoning on where the auto-fire talents and feats were placed? And same thing with grappling. Where was the logic in where the grappling feats and talents were placed? And then consider that there are examples I didn't give. So the sniping and the general hand-to-hand combat, those also were just all over the place without making any sense. I have now just inadvertently gone into the realm of why stuff is in the wrong place. And yes, stuff's in the wrong place, but before I continue on examples of why stuff's in the wrong place, there's still a few more things about why stuff's all over the place that I have to go into. So another example of why stuff's all over the place is that within a single book, there's stuff all over the place. A single book might be disorganized. So for instance, the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide has armors listed on pages 70 through 72, but that's the general armor listed in the equipment chapter. Armor is then again listed on page 179, the chapter describing the Old Republic as a faction, as on that page it lists the armor worn by the Old Republic troops. But the Mandalorian armor is listed separately on pages 201 through 202 in the section for the Mandalorians. Why couldn't all the armor be listed in the equipment chapter, and why couldn't the armors just be labeled to identify which faction they belong to, instead of being hidden in obscure sections of the book? I think the main problem contributing to why stuff's all over the place is that talents and feats are not put together according to build. Just to be clear, there are talent trees in this game, where talents are grouped into trees, so abilities with similar effects are categorized with each other, but I will prove that not everything that should be in a particular talent tree is in a talent tree. Not all abilities that have similar effects are in the same talent tree, and feats still aren't in feat trees as talents are. So even though talent trees exist in Star Wars Saga Edition, this still isn't sufficient to make sure build crafting is easy. So let me compare Saga Edition to the Pathfinder role-playing game. Pathfinder has something called feat trees. That is, feats that have a similar function that build off each other are grouped into these trees. So how does this translate to a problem for Star Wars Saga Edition? What is Star Wars Saga Edition doing wrong? Well, let's take some examples. The Starships of the Galaxy book has a feat on page 21 called the Tech Spec Tree, to show that you're an expert craftsman. The Scum and Villainy book, page 24, has the Superior Tech Spec Tree, which builds off Tech Spec from the Starships book. But shouldn't these be in the same book? One's in Starships, one's in Scum and Villainy. The Counterpunch Soldier Talent in Scum and Villainy, page 18, and the Return Fire feat from Legacy, page 36, kind of have a similar effect to the Blastback Scout Talent from the Rebellion era, page 26, and the Second Strike Scout Talent, also from Rebellion era 26. They're not exact duplicates, but they're similar enough that they probably should be built off each other or probably should be grouped together somehow. The Acrobatic Dodge feat from the Unknown Regions, page 24, the Swerve Scout talent from Rebellion Era page 26, the Fadeaway Scout talent, also from Rebellion Era page 26, the Uncanny Instincts Outlaw talent from Scum and Villainy page 35, and the Die for Cover feat from Galaxy at War page 23 also kind of have a similar reactive theme, a theme where you react to danger. They don't all have to be grouped together, but it would make sense if they were at least grouped into 2 or 3 groups, or just not placed in random spots in various books. Because stuff is scattered all over the place, it's hard to find. But it wouldn't be so much of a problem if it made sense where it was placed. As in, all the auto-fire feats are all over the place, but as long as the auto-fire feats themselves are placed in a spot where you would go to look for them, it'd be okay, right? But stuff's in the wrong place. Now, I don't have much to say about this, so let me just go into the examples. There is a scout talent in the Knights of the Old Republic book called Hidden Attacker on page 29. This skill makes it easier for snipers to stay hidden. Shouldn't this be in the Scum and Villainy book, which seems to be the main book for snipers? It has all the sniping stuff. It has the Assassin Prestige class that has a whole lot of features for attacking someone at long distance. And it fits in with the theme of being dastardly and using unfair tactics to attack someone. Why is this in the Knights of the Old Republic book? Why are characters in Knights of the Old Republic more sneaky snipers than in any other era? Say, Legacy, Dark Times, Clone Wars, Rebellion. In fact, I think Knights of the Old Republic might be the worst era to put this in. The Hidden Attacker talent seems to be most out of place in Knights of the Old Republic, a setting that's supposed to be focused on melee combat. The Medic Prestige class is in the Force Unleashed book, page 52 through 54, but shouldn't it be in the Galaxy at War book, or the Clone Wars book, or the Rebellion Era book? A book where there is more mass combat? And if you want to argue, well, yeah, there's also combat in Force Unleashed and the Dark Times. On that logic, then the Medic class could be in any book, so perhaps it should have just been in the core rulebook. It's as if they realized, hey, we forgot to put this Medic class in the core rulebook. Let's just get it in the first book we can get it into. The Unknown Regions book has stuff for the Military Officer Prestige class, a prestige class from the core rulebook. Yet none of the talents on page 31 relate to exploring the galaxy. And this is in the Unknown Regions book, a book on exploring the galaxy. The Unknown Regions book also has talents for the Crime Lord Prestige class. The Crime Lord is a prestige class also introduced in the core book. The talents on page 29, Master Manipulator and Small Favor, would be well suited for the Galaxy of Intrigue book, more so than the Unknown Regions book. And the talent on page 30, Master's Orders, would be suited for any book, really, so why is it in the Unknown Regions book? The Aggressive Negotiations Jedi talent is in the Legacy Era book, page 26. But why not in the Clone Wars book, as that's where the actual quote came from? The actual quote came from Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Why is this in the Legacy Era book? If you came by the Aggressive Negotiations talent and said, yeah, I like that talent, you were creating your Jedi characters, say, 2 months later, and you were like, yeah, I do want that talent, which book do I look in again? Oh, you'd probably go to the Clone Wars book and not see it there. The Force Unleashed book has the Cleanse Mind talent for the Jedi class on page 24. But why is it in this book when Force powers are not particularly common in this era as other eras? And yes, there are Inquisitors in this era, so it does kind of make sense, but I still think it would make a whole lot more sense in Knights of the Old Republic or Legacy Era. This edition is so messy that the people who created the edition, the company Wizards of the Coast, didn't seem to have a grasp of the edition, didn't even know what was in their own edition. And this is shown by the amount of duplications, redundancies, replications, omissions, and abilities that make other abilities obsolete. So let's start with the omissions. If something wasn't in any of the books, how do I know that it was supposed to be in the books? In my last video, I mentioned some web blogs and web posts that I referred to, and I read those posts before the game came out. And in one of those web posts, it mentions the fact that non-heroic characters don't add half their non-heroic level to damage. But heroic characters do add half their level to damage. So the edition needed to specify that non-heroic characters have a different damage calculation than heroic characters. And why is this a big deal? Because the core rulebook doesn't mention that. Now, I know for a fact that this rule should be in there, because of the fact that if you look at the stats for non-heroic characters, they don't add half their level to the damage, and it was in the actual web enhancement. So that's something that was not in the edition that should have been there. Now that rule is in a web post that came out before the edition did. After the edition came out, there were other web enhancements that came out to supplement it. In one of those web enhancements was the Jawa Barge. Now, the Jawa Barge is just something so iconic to the Star Wars franchise that it just should be in the core rulebook or in one of the books. It should be in there, because it's, how do you not have the Jawa Barge in a Star Wars role-playing game, except in a web enhancement? Star Wars Saga Edition has a fair number of redundancies. And when I say redundancy, I mean two abilities that effectively do the same thing. They might be worded differently, they might technically have a different mechanic to them, but a redundancy in abilities in this edition really means that there's really no reason for both abilities to exist, whether they be feats or talents or whatever. Some examples of such redundancies: there's the Hunker Down Scout talent from Scum and Villainy page 16, and the Defensive Position Soldier talent from Galaxy at War page 21, which basically means if you have cover, you just brace yourself against the cover more and you're a little bit better covered. The Multi-Grab feat from the Legacy Era page 36, and the Crowd Control Soldier talent from Galaxy of Intrigue page 23, both allow you to grapple two characters at once. But the Crowd Control Soldier talent is a talent. Talents are supposed to be more valuable than feats, so why bother wasting a talent on it when you can get a feat? Now imagine that you want to play a character that's sneaky and is good at ambushing people. What talent or feat would you get to represent that? Well, you could go with the tried and true Sneak Attack and Dastardly Attack talents from the Scoundrel class from the core rulebook. But you could also gain the Advantageous Attack feat from the Force Unleashed page 31, the Ambush Noble talent from Scum and Villainy page 13, and any ability from the Ambusher talent tree, a Soldier talent tree from the Rebellion Era page 28. Now these abilities aren't exactly the same, but it's effectively, I'm good at surprising people and doing sneak attacks. And one thing to consider, the Ambusher talent tree from the Soldier class in the Rebellion book seems different from the Noble class. The Soldier is more, I am good at sneaking on someone, and the Noble talent is, I'm great at leading people to launch a sneak attack. There's more group synergy with the Noble talent. But here's the catch. In the Ambusher talent tree, there is one Soldier talent called Spring the Trap. So that creates group synergy right there and creates the redundancy with the Ambush Noble talent. There are instances within Star Wars Saga Edition in which some abilities not only replicate other abilities, but outdo them. Some abilities make other abilities obsolete. Some examples: the Make Do Soldier talent from Scum and Villainy page 18, and the Improvised Weapon Mastery feat from the Unknown Regions, page 27, are both the same thing. You're good at fighting with improvised weapons, except the feat is better than the talent, and talents are supposed to be better than feats. And what's worse, both are kind of like the Gun Club Soldier talent from the core book, page 52. The Gun Club talent allows you to attack with the butt of your gun, which counts as an improvised weapon. So the Gun Club talent also does the same thing, yet is even more limited to just hitting with the butt of your gun. The Exotic Weapon Master Gladiator talent from Knights of the Old Republic, page 44, is like the Elite Trooper talent, Exotic Weapon Mastery, from the core rulebook, page 212, except the Gladiator talent is better. Note that the Gladiator talent is Exotic Weapons Master, and the Elite Trooper talent is Exotic Weapon Mastery, which doesn't help with the similar names. The Keep Them at Bay Soldier talent from Clone Wars, page 26, functions similar to the Gunslinger talent Keep Them Honest from Galaxy at War, page 31. However, the Soldier talent Improve Suppression Fire from Legacy Era, page 31, does everything those two talents do, except better. The Combat Trickery feat from the Unknown Regions, page 24, has a similar effect to the Dirty Tricks talent of the Melee Duelist Prestige class from Knights of the Old Republic, page 47, except the Melee Duelist talent is a talent, and yet it's worse than the Combat Trickery feat because with the feat, you get the option of spending a force point to improve the effect. I have provided examples of specific abilities being redundant with other abilities, sometimes to the point of making those other abilities obsolete. However, there are two entire prestige classes that demonstrate why Star Wars Saga Edition has a problem with redundancies. They are the Improviser Prestige class from the Rebellion Era book, page 41, and the Military Engineer Prestige class from the Clone Wars book, page 44. So what is it about these prestige classes that's so problematic? First off, they have redundancies with other classes. The Improviser is supposed to have a partial black market theme, but the Smuggling talent tree from the Scoundrel class in Force Unleashed, page 27, has some of that black market stuff in it. Why are there black market talents in two separate places? Do they belong with the Improviser, or do they belong with the Scoundrel? The Military Engineer has two talents that deal with planting explosives: Breaching Explosive and Prepared Explosive. There is a Saboteur Prestige class from the Force Unleashed, page 54. These talents seem like they would be a great fit for that class, so why not put them in that class? And hey, shouldn't there be prestige classes that build upon base classes? As in, shouldn't the Improviser be a prestige class for black market themes to build upon the core class of Scoundrel? And shouldn't the Military Engineer also be able to do sabotaging in ways different from the Saboteur Prestige class to give it its own niche? Well, these classes aren't dedicated to those themes of sabotaging or black market stuff. And in fact, when you strip the black market stuff and the explosive stuff out of here, these two classes become very similar to each other. Both the Military Engineer and the Improviser prestige classes have some thrown explosive ability. So the Military Engineer has Breach Cover, and the Improviser has Bigger Bang, two abilities to help throw explosives at the enemy. In terms of repairing, the Military Engineer has Repairs on the Fly and Droid Expert. The Improviser has Improved Jury Rig. In terms of creating weapons out of the blue, the Military Engineer has a class ability called Field Crafted Weapon. The Improviser has Improvised Device, which is a talent, not a class ability. But both of these abilities are kind of duplications of other classes' abilities, such as Bomb Thrower, a Scoundrel talent from Intrigue, page 21, and a Turret talent tree from the Saboteur's Prestige class that's found on Unleashed page 57. If the bomb thrower ability and the turret talent tree are good examples of improvising weapons, why are they not in these two Prestige classes, which are supposed to be about improvising weapons? These two classes also have abilities to utilize the tech spec feat. The military engineer has the quick modifications talent, and the improviser has the custom model talent, and those talents utilize a feat found in the Starships of the Galaxy book called the tech spec feat. Basically, these two prestige classes should probably be combined into one after ripping out the black market stuff and the planted explosive stuff. And the black market stuff should be in Scoundrel. The planted explosive stuff should be in the Saboteur prestige class. If you wanted to create a character with good mechanical skills, and you wanted that character to be good at utilizing those mechanical skills in a way that makes them resourceful and good at ad hocing and improvising objects, and being like MacGyver and good at jury rigging, you'd want to go Scout for the jury rig talent in the core book. And if you're going Scout, you probably also want the Traceless Tampering talent from the Unleashed book, page 28. You probably want levels in Scoundrel, and then you'd want to take levels in Saboteur, Military Engineer, and Improviser prestige classes just to be able to fit a theme of being able to jury rig up items and have adaptable mechanical abilities. Should there be more than one path to the same goal? Should there be multiple classes that can fit this theme? They each have their own talents to accomplish the same thing, and the distinct way in which each of their talents operate gives each class their flavor? Sure, but that's not what we have here. What we have here is just, here's an ability it gets thrown in this class, here's an ability it gets thrown for this class. There's no reason why certain abilities are put with the Improviser class and certain abilities are put with the Military Engineer class. In addition to various abilities functioning very similarly to other abilities, there's times when certain elements, whether they be abilities, items, or species, are simply reprinted. For instance, the Miraluka species appears in Threats of the Galaxy page 31 and Knights of the Old Republic page 16. The Cortosis Gauntlet appears on Threats of the Galaxy page 45 and the Legacy Era page 183. The Light Whip appears in Threats of the Galaxy page 84 and the Jedi Academy Training Manual page 53. These are all reprints, but you may be thinking, hold on, Threats of the Galaxy appears in each of these three examples because, hey, they don't want to have to make you refer to another book to look something up. If the enemy or foe has an item, they should have the item reprinted right there. And Threats of the Galaxy also was the third book to come out and came out before all those other books. Okay, I got ya. Then how about this example? The Illusion Force talent is in 3 books. Knights of the Old Republic, page 52, the Jedi Academy Training Manual, page 14, and the Force Unleashed, page 87. And the Jedi Academy Training Manual delves into successor talents that build off the base Illusion Force talent. If that talent was so important, shouldn't it be in the core rulebook? And shouldn't the successor talents be reprinted wherever the base talent is printed? In this video, I have given examples of how player options are spread throughout 5 era books, 5 class theme books, and the core rulebook. That's 11 books that player options are spread throughout. That must mean that there are a lot of player options that if they fill 11 books, well, hey, so be it. That's a good reason why they're spread throughout so many books. There's just so many player options. But is that true? What I would like to discuss now is each individual book worth getting? I mentioned that there's no go-to book for player options, yet there are player options spread throughout 11 books. Each era book and each class theme book does not have that many player options, not enough to justify a book of its own. And also note how none of the books I've given so far, except maybe Threats of the Galaxy, have been a dedicated Game Master book. So, what else is in the books? If you're a player, the books might not be worth getting because there's so much within the books that a player might not use. So for example, the Force Unleashed book has rules for organizations. And that'd be great if the PCs are part of an organization. But this does not need to be in a book that the players would buy. Sure, the players may be a part of an organization, but the rules presented in the Force Unleashed for organizations is not rules that a player would use even if they are a part of an organization. The only exception is if they gain this one feat, I think it's called Natural Leader, on page 34 of Force Unleashed. That feat is a feat that gives players the ability to lead an organization and create their own organization. Otherwise, even if a player is a part of an organization, they don't need to know the rules for organizations. Most of the roles and most of the rules determining what happens in an organization is usually determined by the Game Master. A whole chunk of Force Unleashed has rules for organization. When the Force Unleashed takes place during the Dark Times, and all eras have organizations. Why is it in that book? The Scum and Villainy book has lots of rules about freelance work and rules for the GM to hand freelance work to the players. So if they want to be mercenaries or bounty hunters, there's rules for how to set up the appropriate rewards for the appropriate type of challenge for such a freelance type of work. But does that need to be in the Scum and Villainy book? Because if a player wants to play as a character that's the Scum and Villainy of the Galaxy, do they need their own rules for the GM giving them jobs? Or is that just for the GM? The Galaxy at War book has rules for the base assault and the defense of a base. So it's to help a GM create a base and create a scenario in which the players would storm the base. Does the GM want the players to see those rules? Or should those rules just be in a dedicated GM book? If the players want to buy the Galaxy at War to create characters for a war setting, do they really need the rules that the GM's going to use? Some of the books, particularly Galaxy of Intrigue, Scum and Villainy, The Unknown Regions, and the Galaxy at War book, have mini adventures and encounters. But do these need to be in the books that the players would buy? And does the GM want the players to have these rules? The Unknown Regions book has rules for creating new and undiscovered planets. This is also stuff the players don't need to see. The skill challenges from the Intrigue book are kind of like the Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition skill challenges. Do the players really need to see this? Maybe the players do because there are options in that book for players to get in order to beat skill challenges, but I still question this a little bit. And many of the books have stats for enemies that the players would fight. This is something the players don't really need, unless it's stats for a droid that they're going to buy. Then those stats should be in the Scavenger's Guide to Droids, because the Droids book is where the player should go to get droids. These books are not a full GM book and not a full player book. Therefore, they're not a whole book dedicated to the player, and if a player buys these books, they're buying like the first 1/3 or 1/2 of the book, and the Game Masters might not even want the players to see the stuff that is for the Game Master. And not only that, if the Game Master wants to have a game in which the characters work for an organization, storm a base, explore new planets, and engage in skill challenges, and they're bounty hunters, they would need the Force Unleashed book, Scum and Villainy book, Galaxy at War book, Galaxy of Intrigue book, and the Unknown Regions book. Why shouldn't there just be a book for the GM to get for rules on helping the GM run a game and create adventures for their players? Hopefully you can see how this edition has so many drawbacks to the way it's designed that the only explanation, the only justification for how it's designed is the 3-book idea. But does this 3-book idea come together? That is it sufficient for a player to just have the 3 books in order to play a game? if I was a player and I wanted to play a scoundrel in the Clone Wars, if I bought the core rulebook, if I bought the Clone Wars book, and if I bought the Scum and Villainy book, would that be enough for me to play a scoundrel during the Clone Wars? And as you can see, the Clone Wars book and the Scum and Villainy book don't really have enough player options. They have so much Game Master stuff that no, it's not sufficient because the value of each book makes me not want to buy the book. So if I'm playing a scoundrel during the Clone Wars, I don't want to buy the Clone Wars book because there's not enough stuff for a player in that book to justify why a player should buy that book. There is not enough stuff in the Scum and Villainy book for players to justify a player buying that book. Therefore, the 3-book idea doesn't work. There are other reasons why the 3-book idea doesn't work. And the next thing I will examine are the era books. I don't think the era books serve as a good guide to the era. I don't believe the era books serve their purpose well. And what do I mean by this? Well, let's take a look at the eras. There are some eras, such as Knights of the Old Republic, that last hundreds of years. I think maybe even like 1,000 years or something. The Dark Times last about 19 years, I believe. The Rebellion era lasts 5 years. The Clone Wars last like 2.5 or 3 years. And the Legacy era, it starts at like 135 years after the Battle of Yavin or something like that. I don't have an endpoint for it. But these eras aren't of equal length. In fact, they occur after the other. I remember reading a comic series that takes place during the Dark Times. And when I was reading through the comic book, I saw pictures of starships that are statted in the Star Wars Saga Edition books, but they were statted in the Clone Wars books. Decommissioned droids had to go somewhere. Some of the clones that fought in the Clone Wars were still around afterwards. The Clone Wars era runs into the Dark Times. The Dark Times runs into the Rebellion era. Why is it that we have to have 3 distinct eras for roughly a 40-year period of time? No, 30-year period of time. When we have Knights of the Old Republic, which covers hundreds of years. Do the era books even provide a sufficient campaign setting? I remember reading the Knights of the Old Republic book. I was so confused about the lore because of the way it was presented. I caught a few things, but I didn't understand it fully. I didn't really grasp it because I hadn't read the Tales of the Jedi comics and I hadn't played the Knights of the Old Republic video games. I still have not finished any Knights of the Old Republic video game, but I read the Tales of the Jedi Omnibus Volume 1 and 2, and the lore made so much sense. The Knights of the Old Republic book doesn't even include the Great Hyperspace Wars, which were part of the Tales of the Jedi comic series. In fact, some of the stuff from that era, the Great Hyperspace War, is found in one of the class and theme books, the Jedi Academy Training Manual. So, is the Jedi Academy Training Manual supposed to be a class and theme book, or a campaign setting? Which leads me to the class and theme books. They have their own issues too. I call the theme books also class books and the class book theme books because the themes of those books are tied to a class. Galaxy at War is tied to the Soldier class. Scum and Villainy is tied to Scoundrel. Unknown Regions is tied to Scout. Jedi Academy Training Manual is tied to Jedi. And the Galaxy of Intrigue is tied to Nobles. But here's the problem. Each of those books, except for the Jedi Academy Training Manual, has feats and abilities and player options for all classes. So Galaxy of Intrigue has options for all the classes, not just Nobles. So there's really no go-to source book for any class. All the Noble stuff is spread throughout all 5 of those class theme books. And getting the Galaxy of Intrigue gives you stuff for all classes, not just Noble. So if you want to play a Noble, getting just the Galaxy of Intrigue book isn't really sufficient. Unless it were the case that the best stuff for Nobles was in the Galaxy of Intrigue. So if I wanted to play a Noble, I had options within all books, but if I went to Galaxy of Intrigue, I'd be set as a Noble, right? Because that's the best stuff, right? Well, no. The Galaxy of Intrigue book has talents for nobles that I don't care to use, and a lot of those player options in that book for the noble class deal so much with the skill challenges that there's not much else for nobles aside from the skill challenge stuff. But oh, wait a minute. There's a lot of decent stuff for scouts in the Galaxy of Intrigue book. Meanwhile, in the Unknown Regions book, the book that's supposed to be for scouts, I don't like the scout options in that book, but I love what they added for the soldiers in that book. The Scum and Villainy has some decent stuff for scoundrels, but I think the best noble stuff is in the Scum and Villainy book, which is supposed to be for the scoundrels, but I don't really care for the scoundrel stuff they have in that book. And I get it. There are some nobles that are supposed to be two-faced, but, if a noble's two-faced, they should multi-class into scoundrel, so that there's good stuff for scoundrel, but just whatever. I give up. Just whatever. If you noticed, the whole point of me having a section in this video called Stuff's in the Wrong Place is because stuff's in the wrong place. And this is it. The 5 class theme books don't represent the 5 classes and themes. So stuff's not in the appropriate class theme book. There's no go-to book for the class and theme. So if I wanted to play a scout, I'd go to the Unknown Regions book, but I should still buy the other 9 books. I should buy the other 4 class theme books, but I should buy all 5 era books, regardless of the era I'm playing in, because there's just stuff I might want to use in that book. And if I might want to multi-class. If I multi-class, then what's the point of getting one book for a particular class or theme? If I want to play a soldier, what's the point of having a book for scouts if I want to multi-class into soldier? And what if that character dies, I create a new character, and they don't even have any levels in scout? What if I want to play an intrigue game, but I'm a soldier? Should I buy the intrigue book, or should I buy the book for soldiers? So, I don't think dividing the books into 5 class theme books and 5 era books really works, especially when the Jedi Academy training manual is not really an era book and not really a theme book. Yeah, this edition confuses me so much. It's horrible. And the thing is, the class books have themes, but so do the era books. Okay, bear with me. The Force Unleashed book has a lot of stuff for subterfuge. Regardless of what class you're playing, you might want to use dirty tactics. In fact, there's a soldier feat, I think, in that book called Dirty Tactics, to fight the Empire. That would go really well with the Scum and Villainy book. You want to know why? Well, you can't fight the Empire directly. They just crush you, so you have to use subterfuge tactics. It's great. You could combine the Force Unleashed book and the Scum and Villainy book. Hey, Scum and Villainy is a theme of the Force Unleashed. Underhanded Tactics, it's a theme. The KOTOR book. In the Knights of the Old Republic era, there was still so much of the galaxy unexplored. So that could be combined with the Unknown Regions book. But maybe you would rather combine it with the Galaxy of Intrigue book. And instead you can use the Unknown Regions book to combine with the Legacy era, since the Unknown Regions were definitely a thing after the Battle of Endor. So you might want to combine it with a book that takes place after the Battle of Endor, because that's when a lot of creatures from the Unknown Regions were invading the galaxy, at least according to the Legends canon, which is not actual canon. They redid the canon, but okay, this edition takes place during the old canon before The Force Awakens. So, again, going with the old canon, the Unknown Regions played an important role after Return of the Jedi, and therefore should be combined with the Legacy era book. Galaxy at War should be combined with the Rebellion era book, or the Clone Wars book. Probably the Clone Wars book, because, mass combat, right? And for the Rebellion era, maybe you should have the Galaxy of Intrigue combined with that. You can combine the Jedi Academy training manual with KOTOR. You get it. I don't want to say there's only one theme that fits an era, but you could definitely take player stuff from the theme books and put them in the era books. And then you can take the GM stuff from the class theme books and put them in a GM book. And hopefully people would have the books they want, the books they would want to buy. Because as it stands now, the 5 era books are not worth getting. The 5 class theme books are not worth getting. Because they're not go-to books for anything, for the eras, for players, for GMs. And I hope I've explained that in this video. In this video, I have trashed those books because I love this edition. And if Wizards of the Coast were to put out a new Star Wars Saga edition, I want them to do it right. What they did right in this edition were not the 5 era and 5 theme class books. It was the core rulebook, which still should have been bigger. It was not enough to play the game on its own, but at least it was the base for which everything else was built off of. And the Droids book and the Starships book. The Starships book and the Droids book were still not completely good, only because there was still so much starships and droids found outside of those books. So those 2 books, Droids and Starships, and the core rulebook were the 3 books they got right, and the 5 class books and the 5 era books were wrong. So out of 13 books, they had only 3 books half right. There are 14 books. There is the Threats of the Galaxy book. I want to single out this book because it is particularly problematic. There are too many problems with the Threats of the Galaxy book for me to go into in this video. And this video has already gone on for an hour. So I will include all the problems I have with the Threats of the Galaxy book in another video. As for this video, I have to wrap it up. But rest assured, I do plan on continuing the topic of why I love Star Wars Saga Edition, the system, but hate the edition. I plan for 3 more videos. One of them will be the Threats of the Galaxy book, plus other things that are wrong with the edition that just don't fall into any other category. I will also do a video that expands upon the rules. So in my first video, I explained why I love the system and hate the edition. I still have more to say about the system, so I want to go more into that, and more into the rules, and what I do and don't like. My projected 5th video, if I get around to it, will be one on what I would do differently if I were to re-release Star Wars Saga Edition. Anyways, this is Darth Vangoff, and I will see you in my next video. Thank you.